you can get your feet wet in NFTs making pretty low risk trades if you're a savvy trader, right? You could go and be very clever and on the spot and mint art blocks and be getting stuff way cheaper. There's sure things still to be had here. This market is inefficient enough that if you're willing to do a bunch of legwork, there are sure things to be had. There are collections that are liquid enough on OpenSea that you could lowball collection offers and sometimes hit, and then own something that's immediately, sellable in very short time frame for 50% more than you paid for it. And so if you're just getting your feet wet, you don't have a bankroll, you can do some of that activity and kind of build a bankroll that way.
That was JDH, a very, very early NFT investor, and certainly someone over the last couple of years that I've learned just a ton from. He was very early in art blocks and many other high-profile projects. He's someone who can see around corners and identify trends before anyone else. And there's certainly a lot to learn here. Let's chat with him. This is JDH. So it is my honor to have JDH on the show today, one of the best NFT collectors in the universe. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, man. It's good to be on the show.
You were so early in so many things that, when we first started talking about NFTs, I was just shocked at the amazing collection you had put together. But yeah, I guess let's start at the very beginning. Like a little bit of your background would be great. I know you're not like a fully doxed person, so whatever you care to share would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my background. I started as an entrepreneur like you. I started my own business, is an internet fintech business back in the first .com bubble. So that was 1999. And, with some luck and skill and timing, that worked out and became a pretty big company. And so I got the bug for the tech, for running my own companies and playing with technology. And I guess for being out on that wave of innovation, that was sort of like the first time I experienced that. And I really liked that. And so that was actually over in England, and I moved back to the US and started another company with a friend, and that did pretty well too. And then after that, I got recruited in to work in VC. I did early stage VC at a good firm for 9 years doing, software, investing. So that's kind of my background. I had both the entrepreneurial side of founding a couple companies, had the investing side of working in VC. Looking back on my career, felt like I was good at was if I could really take my time and be intuitive as well as analytical and pay attention to what was going on in the world, I could occasionally see disruptive changes with great clarity, see opportunity with great clarity. It doesn't happen all the time. And I thought that skill would translate to being in VC, but for me, it really didn't actually. And that's for a lot of reasons. I think investing other people's money made me a little conservative. I'm willing to be a little more caution to the wind with my own money. So I wanted to get back to those roots, and I quit in 2018, investing other people's money and sort of focused on investing my own. And 2020, this NFT trend, crypto generally, or DeFi and the Ethereum ecosystem. And then out of that, NFTs came along. And, it was one of those moments for me where I felt like I was able to see a few years in the future and see that this would be, really, really impactful. And because I had the luxury of having carved out all my calendar to do whatever I wanted, I could then go full into this, do full time in this kind of as soon as I realized that this was a big opportunity. And that was key for me because, life's, everybody gets a busy life cadence. And so you see, sometimes I think a lot of people can see these things. They can kind of see the future and they think, well, yeah, it does look good, but I got a lot going on. I got a few meetings, I've got a vacation. I'm not around, and they kind of miss the opportunity to really pounce on these things.
Yeah, I think you and I are very similar in that regard, in that I'd say for me, it's probably every 5 years, there'll be something that comes up where I'm just like, wait a second, like this. Yeah,
you hit if this works, exactly right. Yeah.
If this works, this is going to be massive. And then you think to yourself, like, not everyone else sees this? Like, am I crazy?
Yeah, or you get second thoughts. You're like,
Right.
maybe it is a good idea. Nobody else, everybody else, isn't doing this.
And how do you put yourself in the position to stumble upon that type of information? Like with NFTs,
That's
for example.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, we're like, most people didn't hear about it because they didn't have any. If you don't have any friends into it, like, how are you even going to find the world of NFTs? Like, what happened there?
When I was younger in my career, I structured it very deliberately. After I left my first business, at some point, we merged with a competitor, and I used that opportunity to kind of go on the board and get out of the day to day because I wanted to do my next thing. And then I spent, a year and a half trying to come up with ideas before I found that next business. And that was a really good opportunity we spotted, just really tremendous. And, in that process, I surrounded myself with smart people whose opinions I trusted and would talk to them and learn from them. I guess that's the key thing, is building a network of people who you think are very insightful. I think my special skill is analyzing and narrowing and separating the really great idea from the pedestrian idea, and being able to understand structurally that something is very important, not just really winnowing out the really great idea. But I don't think I'm world-class at generating new ideas. And so I need to surround myself with people who have insights and ideas and talk to them and really listen. I think that's the key, is smart people in your network who you trust and you can key off of.
The same thing is true. We have an identical playbook, in that when the world of NFTs hit me, I had dabbled. I was lucky enough to dabble way back in the day when I had a really geeky buddy of mine that was like, CryptoPunks are cool. And I picked some up for like $10, but I immediately forgot about them. Right. And so that wasn't enough of a signal. But then later, like you, I surround myself with these people that I consider to be the folks that just are always, the best way I can describe it is both the tinkerers, like people that are always playing and breaking things, and the people that tend to love the bleeding edge stuff, love looking around corners a little bit early. And so, I think it was Ryan from Product Hunt and Mike Shinoda that both had said NFTs within a 24-hour period, where I was like, wait, that's two people mentioning that word again. Like, let me go look. And then having that, like you mentioned, that time, but also that it's not about just reading articles. It's about installing wallets, and it's about playing and doing the weird things and breaking stuff, Like, do you agree with that?
I couldn't agree more. And, that to reflect that to my journey in being NFTs through crypto, how did I get involved in crypto? Well, Bitcoin I heard of in 2011, and is tangentially related to that first business I started. I was mostly out of that business, on the board of that business. That was large cap public company now, with somebody who's actually competent running it. And I said, you should look at this Bitcoin, this could fit into our kind of exchange model. And they're like, are you crazy? Like, we've got enough regulation. 2011, right? So I looking back through my email, I was aware of it in 2011, but not enough signal to do anything. Enough signal to say that, but not enough signal to go buy it, I guess, which, obviously a regret. And then I got into Bitcoin in 13, 14 timeframe. I was at some tech events, and I was hearing Mark Andreessen, I was hearing Chamath, I was hearing Naval, these people talk about early adopting Bitcoin. And when I heard in a span of a couple weeks, several people like that talk about building a big position in this, I did. Stan Druckenmiller's a very famous stock investor, not tech, but just like stock trade. One of the top traders of the last 30 years. He says, when he gets the sense for that kind of thing, you act first and then evaluate later, right? And I think that's one of the key things I did, is like, because with these liquid trades, not venture investing, but these liquid trades, you can always get out of it. But when you get that sense that the market, that there's something interesting going on, you just got to get in. And so I got into Bitcoin, but as you know, there's, not much to do with it other than sit on it. Right. And so to your narrow story of this doing it in 2020, as I said, I'd set myself up to have free time, and all through the first half of 2020, a couple of really smart friends, who were smart about crypto were like, God, you really got to give DeFi a chance. Because at the time, having got into Bitcoin in 2013 and 14, and then when everything went crazy in 2017, you're playing with all this stuff, and there were all these alternatives, all these startups at that period, and they were just all science projects to me. You'd play with the Filecoin or whatever. It was raising at $3 billion valuation or something in 2017. And you're like, this is just, as a VC with your VC hat on, you're like, this is years away from even launching. And it's trading at, half the valuation of Dropbox, which has millions of users, right? It just makes no sense. And all that ICO craze it had kind of soured me on these alternatives to Bitcoin. And then you would try and use them because, as you said, we'd try and use them. You'd try and use these, gaming things or whatever, and they would just be unusable. It would just be, cryptic. And so I had kind of soured out of that and, just kind of like still believed in Bitcoin, but I was pretty skeptical about the usability of blockchains for other things. In 2020, several people were leaning on me and saying, you should really give Ethereum a chance. You should really play with DeFi. And so I set aside a week, and like you said, and I got a MetaMask. It's a pain, right? I get a MetaMask wallet. I got to get Ethereum out of Coinbase into MetaMask, and how does all this stuff work?
You probably had to move to hardware keys at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, just getting it out of Coinbase, it would just like get stuck in there, or take a couple days to get out.
Yeah, like 3 days to get out, and you're like, come on, it's supposed to be instant. Isn't that the promise here?
Totally. But then you get in and start playing with it. You start using all this DeFi stuff. And that was just the light bulb in the summer of 2020, which was like, holy shit, this is huge. And I am late. That is exactly the thing going through my head. This is huge. I am late. People have been telling me about this for months, and I have not done this. I cannot believe I'm this late. In hindsight, I was not too late, but I just piled in. I got super smart. I talked to all the investors. I was lucky enough to be in some funds of people who are deployed here. And I'll shout out one as One Confirmation Fund, which is a really good early stage investor in crypto related things. And these guys invested in OpenSea in 2018 and Super Rare in 2018. I mean, they were so far ahead of all the NFT stuff. It's crazy. And so I was investing in startups was my first choice. I thought that was the tastiest dish at the table, was to find private startups and people that were really motivated to build cool things. And then the second was investing in really good young funds where people were, working day and night to go find startups to invest in. And so one of those first investments I invested is this really neat guy, Shane, started a company called Polymarket. And he was really into NFTs. He, in July of 2020, had already been collecting a lot of like super rare NFTs and was really into that stuff, had a real eye for artists, and so he said, I'm going to gift you your first NFTs. And he gave me a few super rare NFTs. And this was in, like July of 2020 or maybe August. And I thought it was cool, but I couldn't say I totally got it. I tracked down the super rare team and invested in that company. Like I got that part of it, but I hadn't got the collecting NFT bug yet. And then that was sort of the first thing to hit. And then, geeking out with Nick and Richard at One Confirmation, because they had so much NFT exposure with OpenSea and super rare deals and a bunch of other really interesting deals. I was kind of getting a little bit smart. And then the breakthrough, which, will be familiar to you as well, is my friend Jack, who had founded my second business with me and is a really good investor. And one of those guys who was hitting me up to figure out DeFi was a little bit ahead of me there. He said, well, you should join this thing, the Lao. It's a DAO. So I figure out what a DAO is. And they're pretty good guys investing in good deals. And yeah, I was a little skeptical at first, what the deal flow would be, but I was trying to build my deal flow, and they were investing in a lot of stuff. And Aaron and Pre, talked to those guys, seemed like good guys, and they were letting it had been established, and they'd invested kind of like when you joined Flamingo. It'd been going for a little while, but they wanted to add a few more people, and I was able to talk my way into this investing club that had a really nice portfolio and really smart people. And at that moment, they said, well, we're also starting this other DAO, Flamingo, and it's NFT collecting DAO. And I didn't really have an opinion on that, but I was like, well, I might as well do it. It was just open. Anybody could sign up for it.
That's amazing.
So I invested in that, I invested in that. And that really was the catalyst, because over time I started hanging out on the Discord, and then there are just a ton of really bright minds about NFT investing in there, and just in general, just really intriguing people.
Do you know what your entry fee was, by the way? Do you remember?
I think it's like 30 ETH with $1,000 ETH or something. But after Flamingo bought the Alien Punk, I was like, I had got the CryptoPunk thesis. These are the two things that I really initially got me going in NFT collecting, were getting the CryptoPunk thesis, getting my CryptoPunk thesis, and getting my Squiggle art blocks thesis. And those are the things that really unlocked it. And once I had my CryptoPunk thesis, and then I saw Flamingo buy the first Alien, which was really on my thesis, I was like, holy cow. And then I maxed out. So Flamingo wasn't sold out at that point for primary. And so I did an initial 30 ETH, but then I did another 150, I got like a 7% position in Flamingo for like 150 ETH or something, which
that's insane.
Which worked out really well.
Yeah, so ETH was around $1,000. So you're talking about around a $30,000 investment initially to get in, right? And to give people some sense, do you have any idea what it is today? I think I do, but I don't want to.
Well, I mean, what is something worth? But the most recent people to buy in, which has happened in the last few months, was it like a 3,000 ETH
for the same amount of ownership, right?
I think for the same amount of ownership. So yeah, it's been 100x in ETH terms, and ETH is up.
I'm curious, when you think about assembling and putting together a world-class portfolio of NFTs the way you have over the years. You spoke about here a minute ago about creating a thesis around CryptoPunks and having an investment thesis around art blocks, Chromie Squiggles, things of that nature. Back in the day when we were buying these things, I remember picking up Fidenzas for an ETH or Ringers or whatever, right? And that was still expensive, obviously, for a lot of people, but I mean, even then they were still gifting them out. Like you could I don't remember the after dinner mints where you could get a Chromie Squiggle if you were like,
there'd be like 30 people on the call.
Yeah.
Even after a Chromie Squiggle was worth $20,000, there'd be like 40 people listening to this thing, and they'd give out a Chromie Squiggle at the end. I mean, the 18-year-old me, the 15-year-old me would have been all over this.
Oh, for sure.
One in 20 shot to win $20,000. Like, are you kidding me?
It's crazy. But let's talk about how you form these investment, how you put together a case in your head to say, I'm going to go deploy capital in this artist, in this project. And, where have you been most successful? What have you missed and why? Like Bored Apes for me was a huge miss, mainly because I didn't
and we can commiserate there. Well, Bored Ape plus.
Yeah. So can you walk me through some of that?
So I had this interesting idea, like, what could you own that people with too much money would want? And then when CryptoPunks came along, and I sort of understood the rarity and the collection and the provenance, that this is the first. And then I thought about crypto, and I thought crypto is minting a lot of very wealthy people, billionaires, 100 millionaires. These people have a ton of money, and what do they want to spend it on? Like I don't know if you read Vitalik's recent blog post of, the backpack he packs for traveling the world, but that dude owns like 6 shirts, and his big purchase is like a really neat USB-C charger, right? Like these people don't own they have lots of money, and they don't want to own a mansion or a Lambo, notwithstanding the caricature in crypto, or a big gold chain with diamonds spelling out their name on it. That's not how these guys want to flex. But I thought, everybody, well, not everybody, but almost everybody, if they make, $500 million, you're going to want to flex on something. And I just thought NFTs were the perfect example, because all the other flex that you might own would be a real world item, right? Like a Basquiat or a big house. But all these crypto lottery winners, all their friends are online. Their friends are in Discord or Twitter. And what's the use of a Basquiat to flex on these guys, right? And it was just so obvious to me that CryptoPunks was the perfect thing, and rare CryptoPunks would be an incredible thing to do. So I kind of got that thesis, and I got that some of that was my own. I brought my own little lens of this selling to rich people thing, but then also at the same time at Flamingo, people were talking about CryptoPunks and just the general provenance, a lot of the understanding that this was the blue chip, that this was the ultimate blue chip NFT in my mind. So those things came together, and I kind of saw it. And at the time, Flamingo was buying a bunch of punks directly from the Larva Labs guys, buying bundles, and there were opportunities as a Flamingo investor to sort of attach onto that purchase and buy a bunch more at ETH or a couple of ETH. So I bought a bunch of floor punks, and I went out and bought some very rare punks as well. And so that was kind of the CryptoPunk hypothesis. And then that paid off pretty quickly. So Art Blocks, should we assume that everybody already knows what Art Blocks is? It is minted one, or should I overview it a little bit? So it was very distinctive to me, this idea of the reveal and putting your money into the art vending machine, as Eric would call it, and getting a piece back that's a surprise to both you and the artist. I mean, not a total surprise. You knew generally what it might look like, but the specifics of what it would be is created on the fly. That was just a really powerful experience to me. That sort of the minting was really fun. And so I immediately was kind of keen on this, and I minted some stuff, and I really got into it. Two things really got me into it. One was, I shared this with some friends and family, and my sister, who people who are into Art Blocks will know, is Kate, Keight on Discord. I kind of got Kate, I shared the idea of NFTs and Art Blocks with her, and she got pretty into it. Her first big thing was ringers, and she just really loved the ringers drop. Which is coming up. And you remember, this is early. Squiggles are still minting, I think, at this point, right? I'm sure they're still minting at this point. It's not sold out. So there's 3 or 4 projects, and she thought, she was super into it. I liked it, but she was all over it. So she went, back then you could go on testnet, and she looked at the thousands of testnet images and figured out which ones she likes and which ones were rare. And
she's legit. That's awesome.
Yeah, she was all,
I got to get her on the podcast.
Yeah, so early. Totally, you should. And she was just really into it. In fact, I was up in Tahoe, and I was going to be skiing that day, snowboarding that day. And she's like, "Are you going to mint?" I'm like, "I don't know." I was going to be out snowboarding, but she convinced me to stay in and mint. And then, the experience of minting, then, back then it was 0.1 ETH mint or something, I think on ringers. So $100 to mint a ringer, and then the secondary market. And, I minted, and then because she'd done all this good work, I kind of wanted a bullseye, maybe one green or blue elements in it, or I knew were rare. I didn't mint any of those. I minted like 15 of these, right? Because I sort of planned to mint a couple. There's no limiters is so early. And then I just minted a bunch of them. The thing's minted out over, I don't know, 20 minutes or 10 minutes or something, then not 10 seconds. And then I wanted a bullseye, and I wanted, some other stuff. So then I got on the OpenSea secondary, and I'm buying a bunch of stuff early, and ended up with a bunch of ringers and was into it. And then Kate, by the way, has subsequently, quit her job and was one of the first employees at Art Blocks, which, you're an investor in, and, she has quite a collection and has turned into quite a curator of this stuff. I mean, she's an amazing curatorial eye, and when Art Blocks just had that big event in New York at the Samsung studio. She curated all the art for that
fantastic.
and stuff. So she knows more than I do at this point for sure. But I had started collecting, and then I was looking at this Chromie Squiggle project, and I was on the Discord, and people were minting it. And I thought it was cool. I liked it, but I didn't totally get it. And I noticed that as the project got late stages, between starting around like 7,000 mints out of the eventual 10,000, though actually the public minting ended up stopping at like 9,300 or something. So got to around mint 7,000. I noticed there were a bunch of people who were just running the minter nonstop. We're minting, dozens, hundreds of these things. And at the time, I still, when I minted the ringers, it actually wasn't really an investment hypothesis. I just thought it was cool. I thought it was cool art, and it was $100, and I could afford to spend $100 on a cool piece of art. And so I was collecting. Did I think maybe it'd be valuable someday? Maybe, I guess, but it wasn't. I wasn't attacking it with an investment mindset. And even when I invested in that first Art Blocks fundraising as an equity investor because I really liked what it was, but I kind of was like, I don't, maybe it's just a donation, like I'm just supporting this project. I wasn't sure it was a good business. It turned out to be, its first full year of business. It was one of the best first years of a business I've ever seen. But it just so it's funny. That's how, when I said, when I invested other people's money, I found I was too conservative. That's the investment I wouldn't have made with other people's money because I wasn't even sure it was a real thing. But then with my own, I took that risk, and it turned out to be a great investment. So anyway, Chromie Squiggles are minting. So I reached out in the Discord to people. I was like, you guys are just minting this thing nonstop. You can still actually find, if you search JDH and Squiggle and look at the oldest Discord post on Art Blocks, you'll find this one. I said, what do you guys see here? Do you just like this art, or is this an investment thesis? Are you you're buying hundreds of these things? I like these things, but they cost $50 each. If you're going to buy hundreds of them, it's going to add up. And what are you guys thinking? And, some people replied and said, I think this is the fundamental project. I think generative art is going to be transformational. And I think these could, I think these could be worth a 1 ETH floor someday. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. These things are not, there are 10,000 of these things. There's no way these things are going to be worth a 1 ETH floor. But okay, I'm convinced I'll mint some of these. So I minted, I minted, 150 of them or something like
you
that.
Have the best,
but
one question about that collection you have, because you have some of the rarer ones that I begged you to sell me over the years.
Yeah.
Were those purchased or did you mint those directly?
No, that was a purchase. So once Squiggle started appreciating, to an ETH and beyond, then my mindset transitioned to seeing these as an investment. Then I could see that once I saw I mentioned Stan Druckenmiller again, is another of his quotes was like, he really is one of the legendary investors of the last 50 years. But he's struggled over the last handful of years with his old techniques. And what he said he used to do in these illiquid markets like we're in is when he'd have a thesis, he'd put a bet on, but he'd put a small amount on and then sit on the rest of his portion. And then he'd watch the tape, which is old time lingo for stock investing, what you would do, right? The ticker tape of stock price, but he'd watch the price action and he would just get a feel for the market in terms of when to go in. And when it started to work, when his trade started to work, then he would lean in to it. And in a way, that's kind of what happened with Squiggles. Like I minted a bunch. Not just that. It's just like I got in at the mint, and then as I saw the price action rise to 1 ETH and go to 2 ETH, I was like, this thing's going. I could just see the way people were collecting, who was collecting it, how these things were being snapped up, that this had become a cornerstone project. It had just been de-risked in my mind. And so when that happened, then I was like, shit, I want to be long some very high quality pieces in this collection, some of the rare pieces in this collection. So I had minted one very rare. I'd minted a hyper
Slinky.
Slinky.
I love the hyper Slinky.
In the mint process. And then I minted an ordinary hyper or two in the mint process, right? But I went out and then I looked at these very rare types, the hyper bolds, hyper fuzzies, hyper pipes. I was like, I would like to get some of those. And then at some point, some of those started coming on the market for around 40 ETH. ETH is probably like $2,000 at that point. And I just thought, I think this is project has some analog to CryptoPunks. I don't think it's not a perfect analog, but in that world, the most rare ones are going to be worth thousands of ETH. So that was my thought, is that if Chromie Squiggles goes like I think it will, the most rare ones will be worth thousands of ETH in time. And so, I snapped up hyper fuzzies and hyperbolds and stuff when they came on the market at like 40 ETH. So I minted one and then I bought some more at like 40 ETH.
The hyper rainbow bold is amazing.
Yeah, I love that piece. When that came up, I had to snap that up. And there are a few of those. A couple of those have traded, but not lately. And the prices have gotten crazy on that. It was a lot. Yeah, I'm sure you can relate to this, right? So we're talking, as you think about what an NFT, a piece of NFT art is, there's sort of a continuum between collectibles and art, right? Like a collectible being a baseball card or a stamp, and art being a Monet or something, right? And there's a continuum here. And I mean, it's not even a perfect continuum. That's an oversimplification to even call it a continuum. But there's, if you look at something like a Warhol, sits somewhere more in the middle than a Monet, right? Like he screen prints like a bunch of one thing. It's a little, in some ways, more of a collectible than it is, or edition prints by artists. Again, if they make like 100 prints. So there's always been, I think, a continuum between collectibles and fine arts and, what's what in that spectrum. And I think the same is true in NFTs with your PFPs, and things that trade just on rarity, versus things that trade on aesthetics or a one of one or something that's really beautiful, right? There's this whole kind of continuum there. And then there's this, for all of us collectors, I think for you and me, there's another continuum of investor or art collector. To what extent are you buying this stuff as a trade or an investment, or you think it'll be more valuable in the future? To what extent are you buying it because you like it and you just want to own it? You think it's cool? You can do both. There's no reason you can't do both. But I do find for myself that, some trades, some NFT purchases are really just a pure investment.
So where do you think we are today in terms of this kind of world of NFTs? We obviously had this very special moment that you and I are very lucky to participate in, when these things were just minting and you could go up and mint them, right? And now it's like, the hotter stuff goes for, like you mentioned a second ago, it can sell for more. Do you think that where are you finding the collections that you're going deep into at this point, or have you kind of paused, or like what's your current thesis on the NFT landscape?
So we've talked mostly about art blocks here now, and a little bit of punks. Now, of course, there's a whole elements to the NFT landscape outside of that, right? There's all the PFP projects like yours and Bored Apes and many others. And a lot of those are really interesting. And then there's non-art blocks, kind of innovative and interesting things. And then there's all this one of ones, all this stuff that's on Super Rare and Foundation, and then you could go even further, right? And think of, the NFT as a standard is just everything that's not a fungible token. And so, in time, that's going to be life insurance policies and credit default swaps and, the maybe home mortgages or whatever. But, right now, I think we're mostly talking like art and collectibles and that kind of purview. But you can edge out to like gaming things and stuff. So there's this whole world. And I think right now we've only explored a tiny part of the design space of what's going to be created here. So, I kind of have my eyes open to see what else people are doing with NFT standards and innovating. I kind of enjoy that end of things. With a bunch of my IRL friends got into this along with my sister, and we like to mint stuff, and people play a lot on Tezos and FX Hash and places where you can just like buy art easily because you like it, because it's, so much cheaper, I think, than the collectible stuff. And I still, really enjoy the Art Blocks drops, but I'm definitely not as a great, I built up, we talked about, I guess the investor hat on me. We talked about my flamingo position, and then I've got, a very large position in art that I collected back when it was a lot cheaper. From an investment standpoint, I feel like I'm very long this whole trend. Like I'm very exposed. If NFTs end up, increasing in holding or increasing in value over time, it's a big part of my portfolio. And so if I feel like I have an edge from an investment standpoint, if I feel like I'm seeing something the market doesn't see, then of course I would take a big bet, but I'm not just accumulating from an investment standpoint. So I think now my purchasing is generally more about stuff I like for the most part, because my investor hat, like yours, I think, is to like be here very early, when you see stuff that the whole world doesn't see. And I guess in NFTs, in the mainstream of NFT stuff now, I think I see mostly stuff that the whole world sees, right? And so I just don't go super long in that environment. I kind of wait until I see stuff that I think the rest of the world doesn't see. And so a couple of my thoughts on this are to, what the vast majority of my successful NFT collecting has happened on pieces that are less than 1 ETH, or certainly less than 5 ETH, or less than 10 ETH. And with some exceptions, we talked about those few hyper squigs, and I did buy a couple rare punks that were a lot more than that. But in general, when I have bought a Fidenza for 200 ETH because I thought it was undervalued, I bought Fidenza #1 for 205 ETH when ETH was $3,000 or something. Those trades have not worked out very well for me. And that was a view that was 205 ETH piece, that it ought to be maybe a 300 or plus ETH piece. And in general, that's, those kind of investing has been a mistake for me.
Curious, as we're wrapping up here, I know we're coming up on time. Would love for you to touch on, if you have any thoughts on people that are listening to this and say, I'm getting into this world. I've got a couple NFTs in my bag. If you don't have a lot of capital, where do you find alpha, and how do you play in this world? Like, what would be? Do you have any recommendations there on how like a new collector would get involved?
A couple of things. One is, you and I talked about our iterative process for innovation or finding new dislocations. And that's surrounding yourself with people whose opinions you value and listening to them. But I think that's one thing I would do, right? Is try and find places to hang out with people who add value. But I do wonder a little bit how useful this suggestion is to the average person, only because I think, as it just happened, like everybody has skills in the world. I'm not particularly coordinated. I don't pick up sports quickly, right? So you could tell me all kinds of strategies to become a really good lacrosse player, which I've never played once in my life, but like, I don't know if I can implement them. And so I'll say something here that I think you and I can do, but might be hard for some people, because this is just what we do, which is, when we say we listen to people in our network who we think have insight, the key is to form a very accurate opinion of who is actually really smart and worth listening to, and is sharing you information in a genuine fashion that not for their benefit, but for your benefit. But if you can curate a set of a handful of people who become your co-conspirators in finding opportunities, I think that's one of the core things. But if you just took random people in Block Talk I love Block Talk on Art Block's Discord, but you just right. Can't take any signal, because the average person is not a good investor. And I think the way you and I use signals from other people to make our decisions, the first filter is a very elite set of thinkers on the other people's side. And I think those people exist everywhere. Those people are on Discord in Art Block's block talk. There are some of them there, but the key exercise I think for you as a new person in the space is to figure out who actually has this kind of insight. And I got the hand up by getting into Flamingo, which was sort of a pre-filtered set of really clever people. So, that was a nice benefit to me. But I think curating voices that you listen to, right? And then just being very conscious of incentives, like it's very different if they've already bought into a project and then now they're telling you to buy into it versus you guys are both brainstorming together whether we should buy in at the same time. But I think finding some people to run with who you respect is a core part of it. I do think experimenting on low price chains is an interesting way. I mean, there's a ton of stuff on FX Hash you can mint for 5, 10, 15 pesos, which is like, $10, $20, $30. And so getting your feet wet that way. And, some of that stuff could become valuable over time. I think an example trade you might make is some of those artists then go on over to Ethereum and art blocks and do drops, and those drops are successful. And I think there's some thought that their early work on Tezos will have value over time, or maybe these NFTs will become somehow portable between chains. And, for the most collected artists, I guess that's another thing I would do. Sorry, this is a bit rambly, but if you look at the series of how many curated drops have there been on art blocks, 30 or something like that, all those drops each have their own channel in the art blocks Discord. And the thing you find going to those projects is, there's a real variety of artists in terms of how committed they are to being artists and how engaged they are with the community. And I think if you can identify early artists who are going to be very committed to NFTs and do a bunch of drops, you like their work, but more importantly, you think they're going to have a career within NFTs. There'll be a series of drops. Maybe they'll do one of ones. They'll engage with the community and build a fan base beneath them. Then I think those are a person to speculate on their early works. If you can form an opinion before they are popular, I mean, it's too late to say Tyler Hobbs is one of those guys. I want to invest in his work if you're just getting started. But, every day there's a new artist dropping on, every week there's a new artist dropping on art blocks, sometimes in factory, sometimes in curated. Identifying people who you think are going to have a series of projects, those will be interesting and their career will build over time. I think you can make a really nice trade by buying their early work and sitting on it. And I think a particular element, as I mentioned, is the willingness to engage with community is not, you can be successful as an artist without that, but it's a lot easier to be as successful as an artist in NFTs if you're there and engaging. And if you go through all the art blocks curated channels, you'll see some of these artists are there and very engaged, and others are, did the drop, but are never there. And so I think it's a safer bet to, if you're going to grab them early in the career, the people you think are going to be engaged here.
That's a great piece of advice.
And I'll say one other thing, if you're getting started, that a couple young people that I've worked with have done on this is, you can get your feet wet in NFTs making pretty low risk trades if you're a savvy trader, right? Like, so you can go in and find stuff in collections. It used to be you could go and be very clever and on the spot and mint art blocks and be getting stuff way cheaper. Dutch auctions have sort of made that a little trickier to necessarily get advantage there. But there are from time to time drops. Well, Moonbirds are maybe kind of like this a little bit, and other things where there's a first come, first serve element, and you can put in the legwork to be early in something that's going to increase in value pretty immediately. Or you mentioned earlier how they used to give away squiggles on the weekly after dinner mints call. There are opportunities here where you can, there are sure things still to be had here. This market is inefficient enough that if you're willing to do a bunch of legwork, there are sure things to be had. There are collections that are liquid enough on OpenSea that you could lowball collection offers and sometimes hit, and then own something that's immediately, sellable in very short time frame for, 50% more than you paid for it. And so if you're just getting your feet wet, you don't have a bankroll, you can do some of that activity and kind of build a bankroll that way. And then if you could build up a few ETH that way of money that you are sort of free rolling, right? Because you earned it on that, then you can then start to move away from these riskless or relatively riskless investments to take a little more risk and see if you can, then turn your bankroll into a bigger one.
Yeah. And one other thing I think worth mentioning is if you have a thesis and it hasn't been disproven and your project gets chopped in half, don't immediately sell it. Sit and wait. And like that was me with Meebits. I bought a bunch of Meebits.
Yes.
Project got chopped in half. I was underwater. I sold a few of them and I was like, oh no, like it's Meebits aren't going to be. And I'm like, wait a second. This is Larva Labs. This is like the metaverse hasn't even launched yet. I'm just going to sit tight. And if you sit tight and you're sitting on some strong IP and some strong, like a strong team that's behind it and a good provenance there, like there's no reason to unless you absolutely need the money to sell at a loss. And so, I have a couple of those where I'm just sitting tight. I mean, I don't know about you, but just personally, in the angel investing side, and then also on the NFT side, I think I have lost, well, not on the NFT side, but definitely on the angel investing side, I have lost more money by selling too early, than if I just held everything. Right. And trying to exit at the right time.
You're going to have a bias towards selling too early. So if you have the sense to sell, you should really marinate on this notion that there will be a bias to sell too early and that you might want to continue holding. But I think it's not so powerful as to implement as a rule, more as a heuristic to incorporate and be aware of.
On the NFT front, and not everyone has this luxury, but it's something that I almost always do, is I buy at least 2 of something. And, because I'm like, okay, this 50Xs, I'm out on one and I'm stoked. And then I've still got my one for the vault, right? So that's always kind of been my go-to.
I think it's a brilliant strategy that I don't do. For some reason, I have this wiring that if I decide I'm going to sell, I sell all. I buy all, I sell all. I never hedge emotionally. And that does end up with an emotional roller coaster for you,
Yeah.
But I guess I do think I have some strengths as an investor, but I have some real weaknesses too. And, one of probably my greatest weakness as an investor is ego. And in some ways, I'll say I'd rather be. My actions would indicate that it's often more important or almost more important for me to be perceived as clever than to be right.
Interesting.
Like and I think that's why I have this bias to sell all out, right? Because if I then make it a judgment that I bought my, CryptoPunks, and I think CryptoPunks have peaked or something, and I don't, but let's say I did, then I sell, I think my failing as an investor is wanting to be seen by the people whose opinions I value, or maybe even random people, as very clever, right? Like, oh, look, he bought that low and he sold that high. And I guess that's why I wouldn't want to be hedged. And that is a terrible bias that I really have to be conscious of fighting. I mean, I saw it all the time in VC where I really bemoaned these bubble times in VC where everything goes up. And then I see these other people doing better investments than me, making more money than me, just blindly going long at any price. People are just piling in. It doesn't matter what price. And then the market's in this sort of bubbly phase where everything goes up. And they look like geniuses. And I'm like, they're not, in my mind, my ego is saying they're not geniuses. I'm the genius. I'm picking like really good things. And I got in early, and I figured it out. But these guys, and so I'm like, I find myself rooting for like a market correction to show that they're like sort of, not thoughtful buying of everything at any price is a dumb thing. But of course, a market correction doesn't help me. Like, in the end, the price is going up is lifting all of our boats. And so to me, so to generalize this is something that might be useful for the audience is like, as you get older or as you get more experience, becoming aware of your biases, right? And it allows you to at least contemplate whether you're making good. It allows you to make better decisions.
That's awesome. Well, JDH, we got to wrap things up. I know we're coming on time, but thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Are you going to be tweeting it all in the future? I know you kind of gave it up for a bit. Are you coming back?
We're talking about Twitter.
Let's do it. 30 seconds on Twitter. I know we only have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, I've been at Twitter's my social addiction, right? I deleted Facebook years ago and didn't miss it. And I use Instagram, but I can easily just open it for 30 seconds, see my friends and leave. But Twitter's the social addiction for, I mean, my addiction is really like information, curiosity, news. I just love that, right? Like that's what I love. But I found, we talked about how I had the fortune to curate my life starting out of 2018, where I would have the luxury of time. I found as a VC, everyone in my life would say to me, I know you're busy, but can you help me with X or whatever? Like everybody's like talking about how busy I am. And I always feel busy. I got an inbox full of stuff. I'm behind on everything. And I was like, I don't want to be busy all the time, right? I want to have the luxury of time. And so I reduced out, I said no to so many things to where I had flex in my time that allowed me to see DeFi, allowed me to say, I'm going to just spend a week on this and then spend the next year on crypto full time. And that's very valuable to me. And I think I also have a thesis where there's times to go all in and times to relax. There's better and worse times to be investing or starting things, and you need to judge those times. And you can take breaks. And then, but when the opportunity is ripe, when it's harvest season, you need to work hard, right? Because those opportunities are rare that you spot them. So that's my general idea. And so now, as we've gone through this cycle and into this bear, at this beginning of the bear, I think it's a little bit of a time not to do too much.
Yeah.
Because for various reasons that I won't go into, but I think it's time to sit and be a little patient. We'll see where the world's going. And then when we have a clear vision of where the world's going, then you can get long again, or you can get busy again, long or short or something, right? But for now, it's a wait and watch time. And the problem I was seeing with Twitter is I just waste my stupid time on that. Like I'd have these things I want to accomplish, and then I'd open Twitter and like I'd become an expert on the Ukraine war.
Right.
I would read 1,000 posts on the different types of weapon systems or NFT stuff. I would go mile deep. So I would find useful things in there, but I could easily take an hour that I could do something productive with it. And, and so I was like, I need to protect my time.
Well, if there's anything that's universally true about social media, it's that breaks are a good thing for sure. I believe in the same thing. JDH, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. Learned a lot about thanks for all your insights here. You have a fantastic collection. Excited to see what you collect next. So I will be trying to follow your wallet addresses and watch it in real time.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And if people, I do occasionally open the Twitter app and I get DMs and stuff. So if people at JDH on Twitter, if this leads to something super important for you to ask me, you can probably send me a DM there. Don't expect a quick response, but you may eventually get a response from me. So that would be a way to track me down.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, that is it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you would like to help us out, head on over to proof.xyz and click on the reviews button at the very top and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks so much. Take care.